Hey everyone, this is your host, Andrew Holland. Thank you so much for listening to the Andrew Holland podcast each and every week, where we talk about business, entrepreneurship, and everything in between. As an entrepreneur who's been through a lot of highs and a lot of lows, I started this podcast to be a source of weekly motivation, inspiration, and support for all of us who are working to achieve something meaningful. And as importantly, so that none of us ever have to feel alone or isolated while we're doing so. Together, we explore the stories of successful people, we get insight and advice from individuals who have accomplished amazing things. We discuss practical and fascinating business models and strategies, and we dive deep into understanding ourselves as human beings. So please, help me grow our group and subscribe to the show on your favorite audio platform. Subscribe to, watch, and thumbs up our episodes on our YouTube channel, the Andrew Holland Podcast. Follow and interact with me on Twitter and Threads. My handle is A Holland Podcast. That's A Holland Podcast. That's probably my favorite part of the whole podcast is the interaction I get with our guests and with you as our listeners. Lastly, if you enjoy the show and you want to support what we're working to accomplish, please share our show with your friends, with your family, and your colleagues at work. This show is nothing without you and your support, and I'm so incredibly thankful for each and every one of you listening, watching, and sharing the podcast every single week. Now it's time to get our motivation, inspiration, and support for this week and jump into today's episode. In today's episode, Don Hurzeler joins me in the studio, and we have an incredible conversation. Don has probably some of the widest array of experiences, both professionally and personally, of any guest I've ever had on the podcast. He was in the corporate world, an insurance company, Allstate, for many, many years, and he rose to the CEO of Zurich Middle Markets. He learned so much working in the corporate world, and he shares a lot of that wisdom and advice. To now, he is the owner and one of the founders of Lava Light Galleries with his wife Linda and his business partner CJ. He tells us the crazy story of how that came to be. And he is just one of the most vivacious and dynamic personalities that we've had. And he has an incredible amount of excellent advice at the age of 76. I had a lot of fun with this one. Don did as well, and I think you will too.
While Andrew Holland is a CPA, a real estate broker, and involved in multiple businesses, including some investment companies, the Andrew Holland podcast is for informational purposes only. All of Andrew's views and those of his guests are solely their opinions and do not reflect the opinions of any of the businesses or companies Andrew or his guests are affiliated with. You should not treat any advice, conversation, business recommendation, investment recommendation, or anything of the like as a specific inducement to make a specific business decision, take a specific action, make a particular investment, or follow a specific business or investment strategy. Thank you so much for listening and enjoy the show.
Don, thank you so much for joining us today and welcome to the Andrew Holland Podcast.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Last time I saw you, you had mantas all around you.
Yeah, so Don and I met on an excursion, an adventure, and Don has, these things are like a normal part of his everyday life, but we met on a boat in the middle of the ocean and we just struck up a conversation. And Don, what blew me away in the time we had the opportunity to talk before we jumped into the water with all of the manta rays, which of course was a new thing for me. You were an old pro because you've done it a million times, and things far more scary than that was you are probably, I would say, at the top of the list of individuals I have met in my lifetime that have a breadth of life experiences that range from incredibly exotic, adventurous, crazy, professional. I mean, talking about the top echelon in the insurance world to almost falling out of a plane to get photographs, professional photographs. So our listeners, you guys are in for a treat, as I said in the introduction. And I can't wait to hear all of the stories. You shared a few of them, including trying to ride a killer whale when you were young. I want to get into all of that. But first, let's start with, how did you get to where you are today? All of our listeners want to know, from every entrepreneur that I talk to, What inspired them to be an entrepreneur? What was their background like? What was their childhood like? Did they have parents that were entrepreneur? Did they come out of the womb and they just knew they wanted to be an entrepreneur? Or did they have some role model in their life that guided them to where they ultimately got? So take us back. Where did you grow up? What was your childhood like? What did your parents do for a living? And then let's go through today and talk about all the crazy adventures you've had.
Well, I think a lot of those crazy adventures are the fact that I've lived so long. And if you live a long time, you get to do a lot of things. So, well, I grew up in a wonderful community on the beach in Southern California called Palos Verdes Estates. My dad was in aerospace. My mom stayed home most of her time, although she had a career later on in life. But uh, a very normal childhood. But being in aerospace, my dad was with one company for, I think, 37 years.
Wow.
And that imprinted on me heavily. I kind of wish it hadn't. In fact, I absolutely wish it hadn't, but it did. And so I liked stability. I liked the fact that you could grow in a job over time, become maybe a master of it. And so I kind of modeled my career after that. And I had a 40-year career in insurance. I stayed 28 years with Allstate Insurance and would have stayed forever. But we sold the part of the company that I was in. And when we sold it, I decided, hey, that's my exit line. I could stick around, but I didn't want to. I wanted to move on. And I worked for a billionaire for a couple of years in New York City. And that opened my eyes up because I was running a lot of little businesses and a lot of little businesses. And I saw how things were much different than the old corporate life that I'd been in. And then I got hired by Zurich and was with them the last 11 years of my career. So about 40 years in total, maybe a little longer. And very happy I did that. It made me financially secure. It all my corporate dreams came true. I got to be CEO. I got to be chief underwriting officer. I got to be chief marketing officer. I got to run a foundation, become the head of our national professional society, the Chartered Property Casualty Underwriters. I did a lot of things that I wanted to do. Got started writing books, and so it was a good prelude to what's now been the best part of my life, which is the retirement years.
Yeah.
So to wrap that up, I retired in 2008, moved to Hawaii. My wife and I decided that we were going to abandon all the fears that we had in our lives and just see what would happen if we did that. And we didn't do it foolishly. We did it with coaching and with practice and with safety in safety equipment and safety people around us. And we tried things, and some things we failed at, and who cares when you're retired? And then we tried things that were successful, and we're still doing that. So that kind of brings you up to date.
So you covered a lot of ground there, like a lot of ground. And I want to dive deep into your first statement. And your first statement that you said about your dad was that him staying in the aerospace industry for 37 years left a solid footprint on you that had its advantages, but it also had its disadvantages. Tell us more what you mean by that.
Well, he was actually in aerospace for 47 years after serving hard duty, coming ashore during Normandy and all that in World War II. But he spent 47. His last 10 years were with Northrop Grumman, and he
Okay.
was in charge of quality assurance for the stealth bomber program. So
Wow.
that impressed me that that there is something about stability. He had one marriage. He was married to my mom for, I don't know, 70 years or something like that.
Huge blessing.
We lived in one house for 65 years, and on and on. So I liked that. I enjoyed that. However, I also learned later on in life that is not the way you're going to really make all your dreams come true. And that's not certainly how you're going to make money. And so as I moved along in my career, I started plotting out what I could do to explore the possibilities and learn to quickly explore them and abandon them if it was not going to be a productive path for me. and focus my efforts now in a new direction and see what I can make of that. And that has been very, very fulfilling. I've done a little bit of investing in other people and helping them to be successful. And as they were successful, I was successful. We've had our own gallery now for the gallery's been going for 15 years. I've been a partner in it for I don't know, something like 10. And so, and then I've written a bunch of books. I've written, I think, 7 or 8 books, and that's been a thrill. And then formed a publishing company because I had figured out in the publishing business who makes the money, and it's not the author, it's the publisher. And so I figured that out, formed my own publishing company 10 years ago, and that's been a wonderful success in my life. So, yeah, imprinted to kind of keep with the status quo, and that served its time and did me a lot of favors for a long, long time. But now I want to see what else is in me, and that's exactly what I'm involved in at my ancient age today.
Okay, so you talked about your publishing company, Kua Bay Publishing. Is that right? Did I pronounce that correctly?
Correct. Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
but what's interesting, and I want to talk more about your books in just a bit. You had What's Left of Don, that was an Amazon #1 bestseller, which you
Yep.
you gave me a copy, and I haven't started it yet, but it's
I believe I forced it on you.
yeah, you did not force it on me. I went to your car after our excursion and I asked for it, and you were kind enough to give it to me. And it's at
Yeah.
the next book on my list. Right now, I'm reading another one called Extreme Ownership, which is a fantastic book if you haven't read it. And that publishing company, because you experience that it's not the author that makes all of the money, but it's really your way of giving back because you not only publish your own books, but you help other first time authors get their book to market in a more fiscally responsible way. Is that right?
I have never charged anyone a penny for my services, not ever, because it's a standing on the shoulders of those before you sort of a thing. And for the first 10 years or so that I owned the company, I took it all the way to actually publishing their books under Cool Bay Publishing because, of course, a lot of these new authors can't find a publisher.
Yeah.
So I said, I'll be your publisher. But there were some tax law changes. You would know more about that with your background, but there were some tax law changes and the like that made publishing companies more like CPAs. I was responsible for all of their IRS reporting and the like. And I'm 76 years old. I don't want to do that. So I say, hey, I'll get you all the way up to where you are ready to hit the button and publish, but I'm not going to be your publisher. And for that, the helping you write it, the helping you find people to edit it, to lay it out, to get it published and the like, I will charge you zero. And it's been a wonderful experience that I've been involved in. I love doing it.
I love that you have that give back mentality because all of us, no matter where you are in your professional career or your journey of entrepreneurism, have people that helped us along the way. And I believe that we have an obligation to help others that come after us to do that exact thing. And that's exactly what you're doing with Cool Bay Publishing. So I think that's
Yep.
fantastic.
Thank you.
Now, I want to
Good.
focus on so you talked about your gallery, Lava Light Galleries, and we'll spend a whole bunch of time on that. But before we get into some of the most incredible photos I've ever seen in my life, and I'll display them on our screen a little bit later on when we're talking about them. But I want to go back and talk about your time in the corporate world because I think what you talked about and what is quite inspirational is that a lot of people think that if you spend 30 or 40 years in the corporate world, well, your chance to be an entrepreneur is over. And that's complete garbage. And you are a perfect example of that. But the corporate world gave you a level of stability, financial stability, obviously a certain level of life stability in terms of a routine. Whereas if you're an entrepreneur, it can be up and down and all around. Talk to us about being at Allstate for so long, then going through a process where they sell the company that or the segment of their company that you're in, and then working for a billionaire. Obviously, a lot of people are involved with corporate mergers, uh, and they're the individuals being sold, and you kind of move into a new culture. You used it as an opportunity to exit, and then you ultimately worked for a billionaire, and then you ultimately became the CEO of Zurich Financial Services. What did you learn through all that?
Well, I want to be clear on Zurich. Zurich's a huge company, and I was CEO of one of their companies.
Okay.
And it was a sizable company, but it was just one of their companies. Even if you're CEO, you've got bosses above you and above you. So, but I love my time there. And uh, one of those guys was Axel Lehman, who has recently been at Credit Suisse and gone through the turmoil that they've gone through. And
Yeah.
I will tell you, despite the press on him and the like, he was a PhD. He spoke many languages. He was a wonderful CEO. Had a great career and happened to end up at kind of the end of his career in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I'm sorry to see him and their shareholders go through what they've gone through. Um, Even at Allstate, I first of all, at Allstate, you learned pretty quickly in those days who was making the money, and who was making the money were the agents.
Hmm.
They had their own little businesses. Not in the beginning. In the beginning, they were basically employees, but over time, they became entrepreneurs on their own. They could hire people. They could have their own office and all that, and they were making the money, and even more than the executives in a lot of cases. And so I noted
Wow.
that right away. I thought, gee, that's pretty good. And then I got into the independent agency and brokerage business, and I started seeing that these people were making, you know, huge money. And then when they would sell their businesses, in some cases they might make $1 billion.
Yeah.
And so I noted that. So I came up with an idea, and I took it to the board of directors of Allstate. And I'm trying to think how old I might have been then, 40 maybe, something like that.
Okay.
And I said, hey, I got this idea. We have people who come to our Allstate agents all the time, and let's say they have a car dealership that they own. Allstate doesn't want it. We don't do car dealerships. And so that good customer for our personal lines and the like has to go find somebody else. And they're probably going to say, you know what, I'll do that, but you've got to give me your homeowners and your auto and your life insurance. And we lose that customer.
Yeah.
So the agent loses his commission. Allstate loses the premium, and we lose a customer. So I said, I've got a better idea. Why don't we form an internal brokerage? I'll run it, and I'll go over to Lloyd's, and I'll get myself tribunalized, and I'll become a Lloyd's broker, and I'll go out to the excess and surplus lines markets around the country and get A+ rated companies. Not going to do any shabby stuff, and we'll be able to place almost anything that an Allstate agent comes across. And so we did that, and it was growing like crazy, and it was going to be quite successful. And I had shared with the board of directors that my plan was, when it gets to a certain size, I didn't think Allstate should own it. I thought that Allstate should say, let's sell it to this guy, me, and I had a partner or two with me.
Uh-huh.
Let's sell it to these folks, let them run it outside the company, but Allstate will still maintain an ownership a percentage in it,
Hmm.
and we'll just be dedicated to Allstate. They bought that idea. We went forward. We had it up in 35, 37 states in no time, something like that. And Hurricane Andrew hit. And Hurricane Andrew just about took Allstate off the map.
Wow.
It did them in. And I got a call from the chairman, and he said, are you guys making money yet? And I said, no, coach, you remember it was going to take us a year and a half or so to break even. How many more months do you have? I said, it's going to be about 7 more months before we break even. He said, shut it down tomorrow. We don't have the money. Shut it down tomorrow. So it broke my heart, and I really at that point decided that I was going to leave
Wow.
the company. We had another company that we had started called Northbrook Property and Casualty, which sold through independent agents. And several of the executives of that company got together because Allstate wanted to sell it, and we tried to buy it. And we found investment people in New York City who were willing to loan us a huge amount of money. And we signed all these scary documents and the like. We put in our bid. There were 7 bidders on it. We came in second. And the difference between our bid and the winning bid was almost exactly the money that we thought we would make on the deal. So we weren't going to go in and do it for no money. And so that's when I went to work for the billionaire in New York City. And that was quite a interesting time in my life, I have to say.
So I want you to take us back, because entrepreneurship is all about surviving the toughest times, the highs, the lows, and the extreme volatility throughout. When the CEO came to you and said, shut it down, I imagine that that was absolutely devastating for you and left an impact on you. Do you remember that time specifically?
Like it was yesterday. Because and I'm not going to get into too much of this because
No.
I put stuff behind me
Yeah.
and move forward on it. But I believe that at some point they either resurrected that exact mechanism that I had put together or something similar, and have used it to offload exposures in states that are overexposed, like perhaps Florida or New York or whatever, and that has been successful for them for a long time now. Again, I don't even know that that's 100% true because I don't follow it that carefully.
Yeah.
But I believe it is, and it shows to me that I was really onto something that was valuable to them and would have certainly been valuable to me, but also more importantly valuable to our customers who we cared about a great deal at Allstate. So yeah, I do think about that a lot, and I then had a chance because of that to become partners with other people and open insurance brokerage. But I was getting a little long in my career and I hadn't made CEO,
Sure.
and I knew it would take a while. And I thought, I'm not going to leave here without making CEO. So I made a couple of quick moves and they paid off.
Well, and I appreciate that you number one, that you remember the day, and we don't need to get into the details, but there's got to be at least, or there should be a little sense, you know what, that was my idea, and even though it didn't work out the way I wanted it to, you had the right idea. Now, the billionaire in New York, how did you make that connection? And you talked about that time because it sounds like you were running a lot of small entrepreneurial endeavors, and perhaps they were really large as well, maybe a mix or a portfolio that had anywhere some small, medium, and large. How did you meet that individual? And tell us what those years were like. What did you learn from an entrepreneurial perspective that's helped you today?
This is hard to explain to someone who's not an insurance geek like I am. So, but I'll put it in terms I hope can be understood. Um, so when our bid failed to buy that company, I got a call from my friend who was number two at AIG, and he was my oldest acquaintance in the business. And he said, "You need to get out of there." And I said, "Well, yeah, I need to get out of there." And he said, "I've got the best executive recruiter in the country for top level positions. He's going to call you in 10 minutes. Listen to him." So I said, "Oh, thank you. Appreciate it." He called me. He sent me out on a couple of missions that were not what I wanted at all.
Yeah.
And he did it on he was frank with me. He said, "If you don't go out and do these, I'm not going to put you in front of where you belong to be." He said, "I need your help because I can't find good candidates, and you're a good candidate. I gotta put you out in front of these people." So I needed the experience. I hadn't interviewed in 28 years, so I needed the experience anyway. And I went out and geez, these really weren't the deals for me. Next thing I know, I'm in New York City. I'm at the Plaza. I've got a limousine. People are taking me to the Windows on the World for dinner and all that. And I met a guy who changed my life, and his name was Pennington Way the Third. Now I didn't
Pennington
know too
Way
many.
the
Yeah,
Third. And what
Pennington
about
Way
what
the
year was
Third.
this?
About 1998,
Okay. Okay.
and so Penn had this limo bring me to the World Trade Tower, and we went up to the top, and we were having dinner. I'd never met him in my life, never even heard of him, and we had this wonderful dinner, and we just got along so well and the like. And I said, I want to be frank with you. I said, I've been in a lot of commercial insurance for a long time, and I also know personal lines pretty well. And I've got a CLU, so I know a little bit about life insurance. But I said, you're in the excess and surplus lines business, which means the odd stuff.
Mm.
It's the excess is like when somebody during the World Series goes out to the mound and throws a ball, and if it's a strike, they win $1 million. They insure stuff like that.
Okay.
They insure stuff like going to the Boston airport and saying, "Hey, what's your budget for snow removal? Well, we can do 20 feet of snow removal this year. Well, if it goes over that, what are you going to do? Well, we might have to shut down. I don't know what we'll do. We'll insure it if it goes over 20 feet. I mean, so these were weird things that we did. Now, some of them were pretty standard things, but a lot of them were very innovative and almost betting.
Yeah, I mean
So
that's kind of what insurance
it
is.
was
It's all statistical modeling, right? Probabilities.
it, it was risky, but you know what? We were very good with our data, and we were making what I would say informed bets, if you will.
Yep.
And so he had a lot of these. So Penway hired me, and he didn't just hire me. The next morning, I had to go in and see his boss, and I went in to see his boss, and the boss stood up as I came in the door, and he said, "You're hired." I hadn't even said good morning to him, and I said, "What?" And he said, "You're hired. Don't waste my time. I've checked you all out. You're going to be good here. You're going to enjoy it." He said, "Go up. Penn wants to make you an offer." And I said, what floor is he on? He said, "Oh, he's at his home in Maine." I said, "I had dinner with him till midnight." Yeah. He took the corporate jet and he went up to his home in Maine. And I said, "It's Friday. He takes Fridays off?" And he says, "Yeah, kind of does." Allstate was not like that, believe me.
I imagine.
Allstate was it was like 1950s and extremely ethical, extremely cheap, very straightforward. And I mean, I don't say any of those things in a derogatory manner.
No.
I thought they were wonderful things. Here, it was a little more wide open. Well, let me rephrase that. A lot more wide open. So anyway, I get on a jet, I go up to Maine, and he makes me an offer that I just couldn't believe. I said, I'm going to try and say this without the cursing that was in it, but we got through everything, all the wonderful things that he was going to do for me, and we got to the salary, and he said, "And I'll double your salary." And I said, "What do you mean you'll double my salary?" He said, "I'll double your salary." And I said, "You don't even know what I make." And he says, "You're an officer with Allstate, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "So you don't make poop." It's not quite what he said. And I said, "Well, actually, I believe you're right." And he said, "Right. So I'll double your salary." I said, "When would you like me to start?" And then I found out that even in the 1990s, that apartments were $5,000 a month. So it was a little expensive in New York City.
Yeah.
But I loved it, and I learned so much. I learned that the wonderful training, and I'd had training. They sent me to Harvard at Allstate. They sent me to Northwestern School of Business. They sent me to Disney to learn about customer service. They sent me to the Crosby School to learn about quality. They got me a CPCU, or I got it, but I mean they paid for a CPCU and a CLU and a bunch of other designations. They were wonderful, and I found that all that training, all that experience, all that education was directly applicable in a wildly different business. And I then said to myself, I'll bet I could do that outside of the insurance business. And at coming up on 40 years, by the time I was done at Zurich, I couldn't wait to do that. I wanted to see what else I had in me.
I love what you talked about in terms of how everything in your former life, we'll consider your Allstate your former life, prepared you for the next step in your professional career. And then even at that moment, you were already taking everything you had learned and preparing for the next step when you would ultimately retire. And I know that just in the conversations you and I have had, you've applied so much of what you learned during those years to what you're doing now. But for our listeners, when you say you learned so much in working for that gentleman, working for Penn and living in New York, and you worked for him for how long? 3 years, 4 years, 5 years?
Year and a half.
A year and a half. Okay. And then
Year and a half. And then I got recruited away.
And to go to Zurich Financial Services?
Yeah, Penn had left. He was come to the end of his career there.
Oh, okay.
He had left, and he was the real reason I went there was him. I loved him. Unfortunately he's passed away, but I mean he was like a brother. But he was a smart brother, I'll tell you, and a hard worker, and he knew people, and he had guts. And so when he left, I decided, I think it might be time for me to go. And to be truthful about it, I loved in New York City. And we lived at 45 Wall Street. That's where we lived. And before that, I lived about 3 buildings from the World Trade Tower right on the river. And I loved it because you could put on a football helmet in the morning and a mouth guard and walk through the streets, looking, kind of fighting your way to the office. And I'm an old athlete. I like that. That I like to bang heads, so that was fun for me. My wife is an artist and an interior designer, and she didn't like it as much. And so we have a famous cousin who's like a brother to me. He's my age, and he's a rock and roll producer, and he is Paul McCartney's record producer. And he was number 2 or 3 at Sony at that time in New York City. And so we would see him every day, and we would go to concerts, and we just had a ball. I'd go to the recording sessions. We had a great time. And my wife would go out with his wife, and all that.
You were
good
living
stuff.
the dream.
It was heaven. Between the connections we had at work and the connections that he had, we could do anything. So he got recruited to go run Columbia Records and become CEO of Columbia Records. And he went out and moved into the house right next to Ozzy Osbourne, the one when Ozzy had that show,
Yep.
very odd show on TV. He moved right next door to Ozzy and ran Columbia Records. And they moved out to the West Coast. At that point, my wife said to me, "Do the executive recruiters ever call you anymore?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Would you listen to them and see what else is available?" And I did. So that's how we ended up leaving.
She was ready to leave New York City.
She was ready. I could live there I could be there right now and love it.
So where did Zurich Financial Service, you were recruited to Zurich Financial Services as the CEO.
Yep.
And where
they, not as a CEO. No, I was recruited to be the chief underwriting officer. Okay. They had a company called Maryland Casualty, and Maryland Casualty had not had a wonderful success record. It was a fine company and great people, but it didn't have a great financial success record. And Zurich bought it and was going to fix it, as they do. And they had another company down there called F&D, Fidelity Deposit, had been around 135 years, I think, something like that. And so I got recruited as the chief underwriting officer to go in and work for the CEO in Baltimore, which I ended up loving Baltimore. And the idea was to kind of spruce it up a little bit and then integrate it in with Zurich.
Okay.
With the overall Zurich, and change the name. It would no longer be Maryland Casualty and the like. And so we did that. And then in short order, it was folded in. I was then made chief underwriting officer of all of Zurich North America, which was an exhilarating thing for me. I'd been an underwriter all my life. I loved it. It was great. And that went well. And then out of that, they came to me one day and said, "Hey, we've got this new company called Zurich Middle Markets. It's about $1 billion. I want you to run it." I said, I'll be happy to do so. So that was kind of the highlight of my career. I loved it.
And where were you based out of when you became head of Zurich Middle Market?
I started in Baltimore, and we bought a modest little 8,000 square foot house on 6 acres, thinking that we would be there the rest of our lives. And 10 months later, in a meeting, they said in this meeting, "Hey, we have some good news today. One of you," and there was like 1,200 people in the meeting, "has been promoted." And Don Hurzeler, the guy couldn't even pronounce my name, didn't even get my name anywhere near right, has been promoted to chief underwriting officer for the whole company up in Chicago. And it was not well received because I was the new guy,
yeah,
and some of the others were losing their jobs. So it was not well received. And then I'm like, what? No one's talked to me about this. I'd lived in Chicago for a total of 15 years at that point. I love Chicago, but I wasn't anxious to go back again.
Yeah.
And so I kind of ran up the aisle after him, and he said, "Yeah, report Monday, sell your house, move up there." And so I said to him, it caught me by such surprise. I did not have good answers and the like to things, or questions to ask. So I kind of blurted out, "Do you know I've got a 10-year contract?" And he goes, "You do?" I go, "Yeah." And I said, and why I ever said this, I don't know, because it's the least important thing. I said, "It includes a country club membership." And he said, "Oh, I'll take care of that." So that was the last I talked to him, and I didn't see him for quite a while. We were pretty busy. And then I went in about 2 months later into his office a guy named Frank Padalano, who was another guy that I love, great guy. He'd run the home insurance company, and he'd been I think maybe the assistant to the governor of Illinois, which is really a compliment because most of those people go to jail, and he
Yeah, I was going to
didn't.
say it
So,
wasn't Blago. What was his Blago? Was it?
so he was a smart guy, and he stayed out of trouble. And anyway, so I went into his office and I said, Frank, I said, it's been wintertime, so I haven't bothered you about this, but I remember I told you I had a country club membership and spring's coming up, and I'm kind of an avid golfer. And he said, he says, I am so sorry. He said, I got you your club membership like the first day after you mentioned it. I've got it right here. And he pulled it open, and it was a box, and a very nice looking box. And I opened it up, and there was my card, my membership card, and it was to Costco. And I said, what's this? And he says, well, you got a club membership, right? This is the club membership for Costco. It's all paid for. And I said, well, you have to be kidding me. And he goes, yeah, I am. He says, join any club you want. We don't care.
I was going to say, so he had a good sense of humor.
He did have a good sense of humor, but he could be a tough guy, but he had a great sense of humor.
So you're told in this major meeting with 1,200 people, you got to sell your modest little 8,000 square foot home that you just bought 10 months ago and move to Chicago. And
we put it on the market. And the first day on the market, a Baltimore Oriole, 22 years old, with a $2.7 million a year contract, came in. I had a huge, and I mean huge, baseball card memorabilia collection. Hundreds of signed baseballs, contracts. I had everything. He came into this big house of ours. He went into the room. He saw this stuff. He spent an hour looking at it. He came out and he said, what are you asking? And I had jacked the price way up. And I told him, and he said, yeah, okay, that's acceptable. He says, how soon could you be out? And I turned to my wife and I said, start throwing stuff out on the front lawn. We can be out by noon.
I mean,
and he lived in that house for 10 years. He recently sold it, but he lived, had a long career, and Arthur Johnson was his name. Great guy, and treated me really well, and financially worked out very well.
That's such a, you have so many incredible stories. We're going to have to get to some bad stories, if you will, but I know you focus on positive things in life. I was reading some of your blogs, and I think you've got a lot of motivational concepts that I want to talk about. But so you go into Chicago, you're the chief underwriter, and then you are promoted there as the chief executive officer of Zurich Middle Markets in Chicago. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. And so that is where you end your career in 2008.
Correct.
Did you get out right before the crash?
I got out right before the crash, and I just want to show you what kind of a genius you're dealing with here. I took all of my severance stuff, all of my pension stuff in cash, and put it right into the market. This was before the crash. And so I have said this in a book or so, and so I'll say it again. My wife and I were on our first 1 month vacation. 1 month. I had never in 40 years taken over 2 weeks vacation in my entire career. I don't mean in a row. I mean in a year's time. And I was getting 6 weeks vacation, and you don't get the money for it or anything. It's just if you're at a top level, It just goes away. But I never took more than 2 weeks. I was a pretty dedicated guy. So now we retire, and I say, let's go to Australia for a month. We go to Australia, and I come down to breakfast one morning, and I'm reading the paper. And my wife comes a little later, and she says, how you doing? I said, well, not too good. The market has crashed in the U.S. And she said, oh, is it serious? And I said, well, we lost $1 million today. And she said, $1 million? I said, yeah. On paper, we lost $1 million. And then she came down the next day and the next day, and we lost $1 million on each of those days. And so on the fourth day, she says, before I ask, how many millions do we have? And I said, well, we can't take this meeting much longer, I got to tell you. So I did the smartest thing I've ever done. I had a very significant amount of cash left over on purpose. And when things like Coca-Cola and Berkshire Hathaway and JP Morgan and the like, companies that I thought were excellent companies and that they had good financials and that they weren't trading at multiples that were excessive. I bought them like crazy. And within 3 years, I had 4 times more money than I started with. So uh, if you can keep from panicking, that old poem about if you can keep your head when those around you are losing theirs, those are times to make money. So yeah, I took a beating in 2008, but it was the best beating I ever took in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, they say often the greatest amount of wealth is generated during the greatest times of crisis, and
Right. I think my Apple shares that I have and I've got a lot of Apple shares. I think my average cost is $17 a share.
are you
So I mean,
kidding me?
yeah, you got to go in and that's when you make money.
Yeah,
It's not when the market's up like it is now.
yep,
That's not when you make money. You make it when it's down there.
that's
So
exactly right. So you retire. You're not retired by any stretch of the imagination, based on our conversations. And tell me how you and Linda, that's your wife, eventually make it to Hawaii. How you get involved with Lava Light Gallery, and give us some insight into, you wake up one day and say, you know what, I'm going to become owner in a gallery, and I'm going to go on all these exotic adventures and completely live a different life than what I lived the first 40 years of my professional career. Give us some insight on how that transpired.
um, we weren't sure where we were going to go. And so my wife and I sat down. I'm a process driven person.
Hmm.
I, like McKinsey will, I've been around McKinsey enough that I finally learned about processes and the quality process and all that. And so my wife and I sat down and we developed a process for thinking this through. The given was that we were going to move to California because both of my kids and all of our grandkids were there and a lot of my friends. And I own property there. And I said, well, okay, that's certainly a possibility, but let's think this all the way through. And so we developed a process, and it's in two of my books. Um, one is called "Smells Like Retirement," and
There
the
it
other
is.
one is called "Suddenly Retired." That process is in both books. It took us certainly less than an hour to go through the process, and out of that, it narrowed it down to where Kona, Hawaii was boom. That's the only place that fit the
Had you
criteria.
guys ever been there?
Pardon me?
Had you guys ever been there?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
My wife's grandparents were raised on this island
Oh,
and
okay.
they lived here their whole life. We've been coming since 1970, and I love this place. But St. Croix and the Virgin Islands was on the list. There's a village in the south of France where we have a lot of friends that we gave serious consideration to, and of course the Southern California area. So it wasn't a complete given that we were going to come here, but at the end of that hour, man, it was boom. And then we said, well, you know, we may be deluding ourselves here. There may be things about it that we can't stand. So we came over and rented for 6 months. And then I had written a new book, and I then returned to Chicago where we kept our house, and I went on book tour for 3 or 4 months anyway. Uh, I remember the last day of that first 6 months, and I turned to my wife and said, "Why is it that we're going back to Chicago?" I mean, we were in love with this place, and so one of the reasons we were going back was there was no house inventory here. It was 2008. They quit building houses. You couldn't get loans.
Hmm.
In fact, the house that I'm in right now that we ended up buying in 2010 had been abandoned for 2 years, 75% completed,
Wow.
and was the biggest mess you've ever seen. But it was built with, it was built to be a quality house, but they ran out of money, and so we got lucky and finally got that and fixed it up, and we're real happy with it. So anyway, that's what we did. We tested it for 6 months. At the end of the 6 months, we said, no, this is where we want to be the rest of our life. It has some downsides, serious downsides. Number one being medical. But we made some arrangements around that will be helpful. They don't cure it, but they'll be helpful. And the other stuff we learned, like the shopping's not very good here. Well, we've got a Costco, we've got a Walmart, and we have Amazon Prime. And
Yep.
between those three, oh, and by the way, 40 minutes away by plane to get to Oahu, where they have everything. So you make the things that don't work work.
Yeah, yeah. Now your grandkids are still pretty far away in California, right? Or have some of them moved to Hawaii?
Well, they come over on a pretty frequent basis.
Okay.
So we've got two in the two oldest are in California. The next three, we've got five total, just moved to Texas, and we've seen them three times since they moved, or four times. And we do FaceTimes all the time.
Oh,
And
fantastic.
the airplanes work. This kind of thing works. You can Zoom them or whatever. So it's fine. And I wrote in the book, and this is people are going to hate me to hear me say this, but it's true. Unfortunately, I did not want to be the take him to the soccer game driver grandpa. I honestly wasn't that good a dad. I certainly wasn't going to be that good of a granddad. And I say I wasn't a good dad. I think I was a pretty good dad, except I traveled all the time. I
Yeah.
was gone.
Yeah.
And my wife took care of most of that stuff, and she reminds me of that not so often, not more than 2 or 3 times a day, but she. And so now here we are as grandparents. I'm going, well, I'm not gonna, I didn't enjoy what little I did of that the first time. I'm not gonna go and spend the whole weekend watching a soccer tournament, and
Yeah.
all that stuff. I'll go for the championship game.
There you go.
So we've made it work.
That's fantastic. And you've also, in the meantime, gone to over 100 countries. You do some of the most just maniac trips in terms of putting your life on the line. Tell me how you got into exotic and adventurous nature photography. Like, where did that come from?
Our first day here, I've always been fascinated with lava and volcanoes, and gems and minerals too,
Hmm.
as a matter of fact. And so didn't have any knowledge of them, no kind of expertise whatsoever, but just fascinated by them. So our first day here, I found a boat that was adventuresome enough that they would take us out by sea and put us right in front of the lava that was flowing into the ocean. And we went over at 3 in the morning and found this sketchy little harbor, kind of scary little harbor on the other side of the island. We didn't know anybody.
Hmm.
We're sitting there in our rental car, and
Is this in Hilo?
while
Hilo's the other side of Kona, correct?
yeah, it's over in a place called Pohiki,
Okay.
which is in the Puna district, the one that got covered in lava in 2018.
Okay.
And there was this little, I hate to even call it a boat launch area.
Hmm.
And so we get there, and it's a wild place, and we get on the boat. And as soon as we get on the boat, I said to my wife, "Oh my goodness, I can hear the surf pounding, and I just realized I've surfed here. This is Pohiki, and that surf sounds like overhead surf. And I know this break really well. There's no place across the bay that you can run. We're going to have to go through the surf line at 3 in the morning with no lights on." And we did, and it was a bone rattling, scary ride up the coast, 45 minutes or so to where the lava was. The 18-year-old kid in front of me prayed out loud the whole way. Everybody on the boat, other than the crew and my wife and I, every other person threw up from how rough it was. Linda and I would have thrown up, except for the fear had closed our throats down to a point we couldn't throw up, and we just couldn't believe it. Then when we got there, it was perfectly still because the lava had built out a little bit of a point, and you got inside that point, and it became glassy water, and the sun was just starting to come up. And the guy in front of me turned around and he said, "I would rather be here than any place on earth." And it was beautiful. It was spectacularly beautiful and kind of life changing.
Yeah.
And I said, "Not me." And he said, "Why not you?" And I said, I pointed up at the top of the cliff, 80 feet up, almost straight above us because we were right on the shoreline. And I said, "I want to be one of those two guys." And they were standing right next to the flowing lava, right next to it. And you knew it had to be at least a 3 or 4 mile hike out to get there. I didn't even know how you could do that. And he says, "Well, one of those guys is my son." And I said, "How do I meet your son?" And so he told me. And the very next night, Linda and I were standing out there, and his son took this picture of us looking straight down into lava that's going down into the sea. And that's been 15 years ago, and we've been partners since then.
I was
We
wondering where
started
that picture came from and what it was of.
the first night that we lived in Hawaii, and and I remember it like it was yesterday because we had on those yellow slickers because the sulfuric acid was just pouring out of the sky on us because there was a lot of moisture in the air. It was shaking so bad that particularly my wife was terrified uh, because of how bad it was shaking. I wasn't as scared because I was stupid and didn't realize what was going on. Because we then went back the next day, and that whole thing had fallen into the ocean, 80 feet right into the lava,
Wow.
gone. So it was trying to let loose and go while we were standing on it.
What year is this?
That guy, pardon me,
What year is this?
2008.
It is 2008.
So,
Okay.
yeah. So that guy, CJ Kale, and he had a partner at the time, Nick Selway. That's been 15 years or so ago. We were at Nick Selway's wedding in Bozeman, Montana last week, and CJ and his wife Amanda and Linda and I then went up to Glacier National Park and had a great photographic experience. We went out shooting, photographing some bears, and then everybody went different directions, and I stayed to photograph in Yellowstone. And I didn't just photograph in Yellowstone, I only photographed at night. And let me tell you, walking around some of the places that I go in Yellowstone at night by yourself at 76 years old, I kind of asked myself what I was doing, but I did have bear spray with me and a whistle, and
You have you have a death wish, I think.
it was pretty stupid, I think. So thankfully, as I'm coming in, CJ calls me and I answer the phone. He says, "Where are you?" I said, I'm in the middle of nowhere and I can hear wolves." I said, what's going on?" He says, the Kilauea has started erupting. I drove right to the airport, flew home, took me a long time, got home, picked me up at the airport, and we went out and spent the night photographing the eruption. And then we went out Saturday and photographed the eruption all night again. And by the time the sun came up on Saturday morning, I turned to him and said, "Glad I came home because this sky is going out," and it went out at noon. The eruption's over. But and we've been to Africa this year. We've been to Ethiopia. We've been to a little island off of Africa called Mafia Island, of all things. We've packed a little adventure into the life.
Yeah, you sure have. And I'll share with our listeners and for those of you watching on YouTube, the picture we were talking about earlier is the cover of Don's book called What's Left of Don. And it shows you and is CJ your business partner or is that Nick?
CJ is my partner. Nick moved off to Colorado and to form his own gallery,
Okay.
and he did that. Now he's doing photographic tours and the like, and he's very busy and happily new married guy.
That's fantastic. And so that's how you got into Lava Light Galleries. And then I'll share with
Right.
some of the photos you had shared when you got back. You and I are communicating via email. One of the incredible lava photos that you took. But I'm also, as I indicated to you, a sucker for animals. And you have an incredible grizzly bear photo that was taken directly from Yellowstone, correct?
Yeah. We made a big mistake on that one. We made the kind of mistake you read about in the on Yahoo or in the newspaper, where it says idiot visitors to Yellowstone.
Yeah.
Linda spotted two bears. I whirled around. We'd been shooting all night at Old Faithful, which doesn't sound spooky, but trust me, it's in the middle of the night. It's a little spooky there. So we're coming up. The sun's just coming up. Linda says, "I see two bears, and they're across the Firehole River over in a meadow." And I whirled the car around, and we grabbed our big lenses, and we ran across the meadow, and I couldn't see them. I said, "Where are they? Where are they?" Well, we never did see one of them ever. The other one popped up on our side of the river, 20 feet in front of us.
Wow.
And it was the biggest grizzly I have ever seen in my life. And he looked right at us.
Is this at night still, or is the dawn just breaking?
It's dawn,
Okay.
just as the sun's coming up.
Okay.
And there's, you don't, in Yellowstone, when you see a bear, there's 1,000 cars. There was nobody, just Linda and I. And I said to Linda, quietly, don't take your eye off of him. Quietly step backwards and keep shooting. We wanted to get, I knew we'd never get this opportunity in our life. And we did. And he found a tree that most of the bark he rubbed it off over the years. You could tell it was like his tree. And he went over and started rubbing that tree, and then we kind of increased. We never ran, but we kind of moved faster. We had about 100 yards to get to our car, and then we shot the rest of the time out of the car, inside the car, shooting out. So
Yeah, that's how you got that awesome photo.
yeah, but it was really a stupid, dumb thing that we did. And
You keep on saying, every time I see you, you've done another one of those things. So I think you're just overly adventurous. So you've done so many things. You're living the fullest life in your retirement, and you're experiencing everything that God's beautiful creation has to offer, and you are capturing some of the most amazing images. From an entrepreneurial perspective, you just opened a gallery in Dallas. You have a gallery there in Hawaii. I know you're opening a gallery not too far from where I am here in Scottsdale, up in Tucson. Given all of your life experiences, there are a lot of people that want to be an entrepreneur, want to take the type of risks that you're taking or have taken and continue to take, want to live, secularly speaking, an incredibly exhilarating life. But for whatever reason, whether they have a family to support and financially they don't believe they can do it, or fear paralyzes them for a whole bunch of reasons, what advice? And so they don't bet on themselves. They don't start the business that they want to start. They don't make that upward trajectory in their career that they ultimately want to achieve. And it's clear that you wanted to become the CEO of the company that you were involved with, but they let fear stop them. It sounds like you made a dramatic turn when you retired and said, you know what? I've lived a fantastic life, a very structured and stable life. And in my retirement, I'm going to make a complete switch and experience the other side. What advice would you give to someone who is still paralyzed by that fear or doesn't know how to take that first step forward?
There's many aspects of me that you and I have not talked about that are not terribly positive and affirming. One of them is that I was a big time gambler for 35 years. And I always declared it to our boards. I let them track my finances. I ran, in fact, at Allstate, they had me use a service that they paid for so they could track it very carefully, make sure I wasn't getting in trouble. And I wasn't getting in trouble because I was a very good gambler. I only played poker, but high stakes poker.
Mm-hmm.
And I had some rules for that. I don't drink. I don't smoke. I don't do dope. I leave when I'm ahead. I don't chase my losses. If I lose a certain amount, I don't go back for 6 months. And I put some fences around things. Now I'm going to go from there to tell you that I use those same rules in publishing books. And this is what I tell a new author. They'll say, well, am I going to get a big time publisher? I said, well, is your name Clinton? No. Obama? No. Well, no, you're not going to get a big time publisher. You're a first time publisher. Nobody knows you. Well, I got 300 followers on Facebook. Yeah, you're not going to get a good
That's not
good
quite going to
publisher.
cut
Not
it.
gonna happen. No. So you're going to have to spend money of your own, out of your own pocket. It's not going to be like you see on TV where they give you the $1 million advance and take you all around the world. That's not how it works. You're going to have to spend the money. So what you need to do is determine how much money you're willing to spend that's not going to ruin your lifestyle, not going to ruin the rest of your life, not going to put your family in danger. How much money are you willing to spend? Put that over here in a corporation so that you are limited in your how much you can lose, if you will. Buy some insurance in case somebody sues you. You say, and you think that's funny, but I've had two of my people refuse to take things out of their books, and I told them, you're going to get sued, and I'm not going to publish it for you, and they didn't take them out, and they got sued. So those things happen. So you have to build some defenses and then operate within that. And that's the kind of the way I am in my in my other businesses. I will commit X amount of dollars to it, and I'll tell everybody what that X is, and I'm not going to go above it. I'm not going to chase if it isn't paying off and the like, and I'm down 150,000. I've lost 150,000. It's not going to be 151. So and do it within a corporate structure, an LLC or whatever you need to do in your state, or subchapter S, whatever, and be smart about it and be disciplined about it. I think the discipline part is the right thing. And then last but not least, build none of this on credit. If you are going into business on credit, whether it be credit cards or a line of credit or a bank loan, I I look at the statistics on small business people and I see how many fail in the first 3 years. You're going to be one of them because the credit will nail you. And so our Lavalite Gowies, we formed that on the idea of zero credit at any time, not even credit card debt, and 6 months rent in the bank at all times. And that saved our life during COVID. And then the other part of it is uh, we're not embarrassed to embarrass ourselves. We will, I'll negotiate anything. And so I'll negotiate rent. I'll negotiate what we pay to have our stuff shipped, what we pay to have it printed. Everything needs to be negotiated. And because guess what? When the customers come in and want to buy our images, they want to negotiate too.
Yeah.
So it's fair game. So you've got to get rid of some of these ideas. A lot of people think, oh, negotiation, that's low class. No, it's not. That's how you do it in business. And if you want to stay alive in a small business, you better get comfortable with it.
It's a whole series of negotiating. And it's interesting. I can attest to the capital side of things on debt. That's how my business partner and I started our company at 22 or 23, basically all credit card debt. And while it turned out to be a wild success for us, we paid dearly for it in years 2, 3, and 4. And had it not been for our real just grit, perseverance, and just keeping your head forward, we wouldn't have survived, like all of those statistics. And so I think
Yeah.
that's very, very good advice, and I would never do it the same having gone back, given the challenges that it presented for us. One of the things that I think is interesting, I was reading in a blog that you posted not too long ago, is your concept of focus. You think about three things: focus, future, and challenges. Tell us why you developed those three things and how you think entrepreneurs can utilize those to their advantage, or anybody really, and accomplish what they want to accomplish, whether in their personal life, their professional life, both, any type of goal.
I see a fatal flaw in most small businesses, and I'll relate it to our gallery business because it's a real easy one to explain. The fatal flaw is in the gallery business. If you're not familiar with the business, you wouldn't realize that there's 100 ways to make money. 100 ways. You can go out and shoot weddings. You can do events. You can do headshots for kids at school. You can do postcards. You can do calendars. You can shoot for magazines. There's 100 of them. And what I see the people who fail in the gallery business do is they pursue as many of those as come their way. They just don't know how to say no. What we try to do, and we're not the world's most successful gallery or anything, but it has kept us profitable every month, with the exception of one during COVID. We had 1 month we weren't profitable. Is that we focus on the 80-20 rule. Where is the money? And the money for us is in large images, and it is in customers who come in and buy significant amounts from us. And it is not in calendars and postcards and T-shirts with our pictures on them and the like. Some people do that. A lot of people do that. And if they figured out a great way to make money on it, great. But usually that's a sign to me that they're about to go out of business. So we focus. We don't let the temptation pull us away. I had a guy offer me $25,000 to do something, and it was outside of our focus area. And I said, no, thank you. I appreciate it. That's a wonderful offer. Give it to someone else, and we're going to focus on what we're doing. So focus to me is really, really important. Living in the present and thinking about the future is very, very important. I'm 76. When you're 76, you have a lot of friends who are old, angry, and bitter. I promise you. I don't. It's a sad thing, but you do. And if you spend your time griping about the government, by the way, I'd be happy to do so, but I'm too busy to do it. Griping about the government, griping about the economy, griping about what your old boss did to you 20 years ago, and how you got done out of some special pension thing or something, 25 years ago, and you spend your life on that, you're not going to have any success going forward. And 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 the thing I really don't understand about it is when I ever get into something like that, I don't get any joy out of it anyway.
It just brings you
Is not only
down.
am I not, yeah, not only am I not getting anything positive going in the present and the future, I don't get even any joy out of rolling around the crud in the past. So that's why I want to stay focused. I want to stay in the present. And we were laughing yesterday about the challenges. This friend of mine was taking on a major new effort in technology, and he's older than I am. And I'm involved in Lightroom and Photoshop, and also trying to learn to do much better in social media. We're terrible at it, and I know we're terrible at it. And I don't want to be terrible at it. It's the way of now and the way of the future. I've got to learn to get good at that. So uh, those are all challenges, and I think they keep you engaged and happy and bright. One thing I learned in my life long ago: I always have something to look forward to. Always, whether it's a trip or a party or an anniversary or seeing an old friend that I know is coming on Thursday or whatever. I always have something ahead of me because we're all subject to the same agonies of life, aren't we? And
Yes.
and and if you don't have something that you can say, yeah, I've got that doctor's appointment today, and I don't like giving blood, but I got to do that. But you know what? Thursday, my best friend's coming to town, and I can focus on that, and it'll get me through that tough spot. So those are why I pick out those three things.
I love that advice on always have something to look forward to, because I think that helps get through some of the toughest moments, and it's obviously comes from a place of experience and wisdom. Don, what's your biggest failure, professionally speaking, that you're willing or able to share with us?
Oh, I share anything. uh, my biggest failure was failure to make moves.
What do you mean by that?
I've got two. I've got a personal one, and then I've got a career one. My career one is I should have been busting moves early on. I should have gone from Allstate long ago to the next one, to the next one, to the next one, and not waited for. In one case, God bless him, and he was a great guy, and I love him to this day. I had a boss who couldn't get promoted, and he was in that job 8 years, and I couldn't get promoted behind him.
Mhm.
And so I should have busted a move. That wasn't on him. That was on me. So that's kind of the biggest mistake I made career wise, was not being more proactive to move myself up. And it comes from that, hey, I want a stable life. And, I know what I've got here. Who knows what that's going to be like there. I made that mistake. The biggest personal working mistake that I made, and I made it repeatedly and until just maybe the last few years of my career, certainly um, up to the last 10 years of my career. And then I cured myself. And that was, I am like a guy who's plugged into electricity. I am so full of energy that it's ridiculous. I've got way too much adrenaline in me, and I'm like, let's go kill something today. Let's go.
Yeah.
And so somebody comes up and they go, Don, will you take on this assignment? Heck yes, give it to me. How about this one? I'll take that. And pretty soon I've got more things on my table than anybody in the world could do. And no one to delegate them to, because I wasn't that high up in the corporation when I was doing this. And so I would deliver perfectly. And sometimes it was worse than this, but I would deliver perfectly on 9 of the 10 of them. Well, guess what? That 10th one mattered, because I made a promise to somebody that I was going to take care of that for them. And maybe it was really important. Maybe it was critically important to them. And I didn't get that one done. All these other 9, I got done perfectly. This one I didn't get done, and I would be held to account for that. And I would think, honestly, this just to bare my soul here, I would think how unfair that was. Don't they know how hard I worked? Don't they understand that I spent my weekends and I gave up my vacation and I did all of this? I did 4 times more than the other people were doing. They were off at their barbecue and having fun, and I'm in here working. And how dare you gripe that I only failed on one of them? And then I realized one day, boy, if I was the one who I had failed on, I would feel much differently about it.
Yeah.
And I was held to account for that. I had a boss who ripped me a new one on it and explained it to me very carefully. And it was somebody I highly respected. And I said, and he told me, he said, you don't cure that, you're never going to make it to the top. And so I worked very heavily, which meant I took on less, but I delivered on everything after that. So I think those are the two things.
That what you described is the shiny object syndrome, and for people, entrepreneurs, that is probably one of the biggest downfalls of so many entrepreneurs, including myself, that I'm constantly working at, is knowing how to say no and focusing. It's in relationship with what you talked about in terms of focusing. You can't be everything to everybody. You can't help everybody. You want to take on all of these things because you believe you can accomplish it, but you eventually become a jack of all trades and a master of none. And that's essentially what you just described. And by making that adjustment, it allowed you, you would say, to become the CEO in the way that you did, correct?
Yes, and can I tell you the smartest thing I ever did?
Please do.
The smartest thing I ever did, and I figured this out of desperation, I think. The smartest thing that I ever did was to come to the realization that it was time to stop fixing things. And it was the hardest thing I ever had to teach my direct reports and the like, because you hire people, they're fixers. You hire them because they're fixers. They've made a living out of fixing things. That's kind of how they show off too, is they fix the unfixable.
Mm-hmm.
But I finally came to the conclusion of, hey, this thing over here makes us money left and right, and it's easy. And this thing over here is killing us and it's hard. Let's take the efforts we're putting into fixing this thing, just get out of it, drop it, get done with it. Put those assets and efforts over here behind the big winner, and let's grow the big winner even bigger. And that really, it's part of the 80-20 rule and the like. That paid off big dividends for me.
You've been incredibly successful both financially and in all of the adventures that you've lived. Our society has a huge focus on the accumulation of wealth or net worth. And we talk a lot about that on this podcast. Do you, as someone who's pretty much accomplished everything that you've wanted to and is living the best life that you can, does money make you happy?
I love that question, and I've thought about it a lot. Um, Not having money doesn't necessarily make me happy, but having money makes really no difference whatsoever. And I will tell you, Hawaii, the island of Hawaii, is overall a poor area. We have a lot of people on welfare. A lot of people don't have jobs. In some cases, in their families, haven't had jobs for generations. And I have found that not all the time, but often they are the happiest people I've ever met. And they're the ones who are with me at the beach at 7 o'clock in the morning when they open the gate. And they're out of the water and off to do something else for the rest of the day. And I don't see them crying and rolling around because they haven't got money. They seem doggone happy. On the other edge of it, my wife and I have several friends who are billionaires, and some of them are beyond happy and living magnificent lives, I have to say, and realize it. And then we have a couple, one who died fairly recently, who was a billionaire, and he was about as miserable as he could be. And he was overworked. He couldn't shed himself of his jobs, if you will. I said, just cash everything out and go to the beach. No, I can't do that. Too much responsibility. and it drove him to an early grave. So I don't think money makes you happy at all. I think experiences make you happy. I think relationships make you happy. I think accomplishments make you happy. I think failures that you survive make you happy, and money helps from time to time, but it is not the key indicator of happiness, my opinion.
I've asked so many people that question, and what you just described is probably one of the best, well-rounded, most aptly put um, advice, and I appreciate you
Thanks.
for sharing that. You've been through a lot of highs and a lot of lows. One of the biggest challenges that I see, just by the very nature of entrepreneurialism, but furthermore, when I look at the generations, my generation and those coming after me, and I think it's probably permeating all of the generations, and I believe it's to a large degree technology, the emotional intelligence or the emotional bandwidth of the average individual seems to be shrinking. And what I mean by that is, and I don't know whether scientifically it's these phones that we have that are curating very short neural networks, and we don't have the patience or the commitment to last to anything. And as a result, when it comes to hard work or dealing with some of the most challenging things in life, whether personally or professionally, a lot of people's emotional capabilities to get through that, mental health, if you will, just don't seem to be there. And if you disagree, certainly tell me and give me your perspective. How have you, though, through all of the ups and downs, gotten through the emotional volatility that inevitably comes with all of the things that you have accomplished?
So I'm going to answer in two ways. The first way is I spoke at the Morton Arboretum in Chicago maybe a month ago or something like that. And I hadn't been to Chicago in quite a while. I'd lived there 24 years at one point, so it was good to be back home, if you will. And a friend of mine who's kind of one of the top dogs at Zurich said, "Hey, I'll give you a tour of the new headquarters." When I was retiring, we were selling the old headquarters, which were two 24-story spires in Schaumburg, Illinois, and moving across the freeway to the Motorola campus. And we bought the Motorola campus, and we were going to build this fancy new Star Wars headquarters. And I hadn't seen it, so I went. I came out of that saying, I have no idea what today's workers are dealing with. I've been retired long enough that it is ludicrous for me to be giving them advice and saying and complaining to them about their attention spans and this, that, and the other, because I don't understand it. I haven't been there to experience it. So you may be right. My experience is that each generation is relatively significantly different than the one prior. And those of us in the prior one are suspicious of them. And yet I look at my generation and I see how slow we operated, how poorly we embraced change. I remember being at Allstate was in the old days. Change was the worst. Change just didn't happen. I could tell stories forever, which I won't. But I got invited out. We were insuring Microsoft, which sounds like a big deal, but it wasn't a big deal. And this was after Allstate. We were insuring Microsoft, but they carried such high limits, deductibles, if you will, that there wasn't much insurance premium. But I got invited out, and I was going through their campus, and I'm in an office, and somebody came through and said, excuse me, Project Green. Yeah, working on it right now. Stop. Take everything, put it over here. Here's Project Y. And they go, okay, great. And he started on Project Y. If you did that at Allstate, the place would go into chaos for a month. But they were used to it. So I think there's things that we just haven't learned to appreciate about the current generation that may have some value to it. On the surface, everything you said seems right to me. I know I write my books now to be 200 pages. I actually could write them easily 600 pages, but people don't want to read 600 pages. So I'll make 3 books out of that. And so I don't know. I don't know what to tell you about that. And then the second part of it I've lost entirely as I wandered around on that one. So what was the original question? And maybe it'll pop in my head.
Well, so it was, how did you personally deal with the emotional? First off, that I think that's a
Oh, great. That's all I needed to
okay.
get back on the plate there. I got bad cancer at one point. And I mean, to the point that the doctor said, don't know if we going to save your life or not.
What point in your
And
career or your life was that?
I was CEO.
Okay.
So it was in my 50s. And he said, "Here's what we're going to do." And he told me all the things we're going to do. And he said, "You've got a good chance, but he said you might die." So I had a life coach, if you will, and one of the toughest ladies you've ever been around, but also magnificent human being, Dr. Loretta Melandro. She's in Scottsdale to this day, and she's written a lot of books. And trust me, until you get to know her, when you see her speaking, like, oh, what a lovely lady and blah, 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 blah. But when it comes down to dealing with personal issues, she's tough. She holds you to account and holds your feet right to the fire. So I called her up and I said, "Hey, I got this thing and blah, blah, blah. And I've got 5 big things in my life that I have always wanted to get done. And here they are, boom, 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 boom. And I honestly haven't made great progress on any of them. And now the calendar's just flipped on me. I may be gone here in a couple of years." And she said it a little more kindly than this, but not much, "Did you call to cry on my shoulder? Or did you call to make a commitment and go and get those things done?" And it just stopped me, and I didn't say anything. And she said, "Because if you want to get them done, you need to right now make a commitment to God, make a commitment to your wife, make a commitment to me, make a commitment to yourself, make me a commitment to your friends and colleagues around you, and get your butt in gear and get them done." And within 2 years, I had all 5 of them done. And one of them was to write my first book. So uh, I get coached. I was an athlete. I had some of the best coaches in the world. One of them ended up being our Olympic coach. I had business coaches all the way along. My young, and he's half my age. My partner at the Lavalette Galleries, CJ Kale, is my coach. He is my mentor. He's a master photographer, much better than I am, and he coaches me all the time. And it's not always pleasant coaching. Sometimes he'll go, "Oh, yeah, that's nice. You're not going to post that, are you?" And what? "You're not going to put that on Facebook or anything until you fix it." And I go, "Fix it." And then he'll tell me how I need to fix it. So I am coachable, and I listen to editors and I listen to feedback, and and sometimes it hurts me. I've had people make me cry, hopefully when I got out of the room, but I do listen and I change based on that.
I think that is something that is, I hear from so many people, but the way you just described it and the scenario in which you described it, so often we take for granted all the blessings that we've been given. And it takes a real wake up call, like you just described, getting cancer, to realize we say we want to accomplish these things, but until someone holds us to account, it's just all words. And if you really wanted to accomplish those things, as you did, once you had someone help you guide you to say, okay, if you really want to do it, just stop whining and complaining and do it. You got it done. And I think that's what can help people separate yeah, you might say you want to do it, but it's not something that you're really willing to put the grit or the work ethic and do, versus this category of things where you want to do it badly and you're passionate about it and you are willing to make the sacrifices to get it done.
And if you've got a great coach or a mentor, they will then hold you accountable. And that means they won't let 2 years go by and say, "Did you do anything?" They'll check with you next month. "Tell me the progress you're making on each of those 5 things." And then, knowing me, I'm making good progress on 4 of them. One of them I haven't gotten to. Then, "Well, tell me about that 5th one. I thought you made a commitment on that. Can we talk about that one in 2 weeks? These others seem to be underway. Let's talk about that one in 2 weeks." And they hold you accountable. And I live my life like that now. I hold people accountable. I don't try to be mean about it. I don't try to make them feel small or whatever. But if they're not doing something, I'm going to as nicely as I can, point it out to them.
Yeah. That's
And I'm not going to give up on it. I feel that I owe it to them, and I don't have a lot of employees now, so
yeah.
I don't really have to practice as I'm more preaching this right now. But I feel that I owe it to them to make sure they're successful. And they can't be successful if they're not accountable and they're not making progress.
Yeah, that's exactly right. From if someone was looking at you, maybe we've covered this. You've been very gracious with your time, and I know you got to pick your wife up in the airport here shortly, so I don't want to take up too much more of your time. But a couple last questions. Other than what we've already talked about, if you were staring at your 30-year-old self and you had 5 minutes to tell 30-year-old Don anything, what would you tell him?
I would tell that person to look very carefully about who's making money and happiness in this world. And I don't think you want to take either one of them on their own. I think you can be happy and be a wreck, a detriment to society, even. I think you can be wealthy and unhappy. But if you can find people that are both wealthy and happy, um, point yourself a little more in their direction, and have the guts to be entrepreneurial and get out there and create something on your own. Create something. You can't just replicate what people are doing. One of the hardest definitions, if you will, that I have to explain to people is the difference between good and great. Because I worked in a business where everybody I was with, almost everybody with, maybe 5% didn't feel this, but 95% of the people I worked with were really good. Few were great. Few were Michael Jordan or Tiger Woods. And those are the ones that you need to strive to be, because that's where all the money is, and that's where all the recognition is, and that's where all the accomplishment is, and that's where you make a difference in your own life and in society. If you can find your way to the very, very top of any pyramid, you can make a difference. And so at 30 years old, I didn't have that understanding. I thought, I'm going to work hard. And, I actually believe they had a career plan for me. They HR put together a career plan for me. They've never shared it with me, but they've got it. I know they're working on it right now. Nobody's ever working on it. I was the CEO of my career, and I didn't understand it until I was maybe 40. So that's what I would tell myself. I'm the CEO of my career. I'm the CEO of my life.
I love how you said, and I've worked in the corporate world as well, for Ernst & Young, a large financial institution, BMO Harris Bank. And it's interesting because they always have a career path for you.
Yeah.
But the
Yeah.
reality is exactly what you just said. The only person
Right.
that's focused on your career path or any goal you want, whether it's a high performing athlete, any path you want to take, personally or professionally, is you, because everybody else worried about what they're doing, and you have to take charge of that.
Exactly right.
One more question for you, and then I'll kind of give you the floor to share anything that we haven't talked about. For those who are stuck in neutral, perhaps in a corporate position where they feel like they're going to work dying every day. For those who are just not sure what to start, they want to start a business, but they're not sure what to do. I'll lump, those are two separate categories, but I'm going to lump them together. What advice would you give to people who are either paralyzed by fear or they're just stuck in neutral and they know where they want to go, but they actually don't know today and tomorrow what to do to get to where they want to go in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? What would you tell them?
Well, I want to be candid about this because I can pontificate pretty easily, as you've already seen, and I'll be happy to do some of that. But my son is going through this right now, and he's mid-40s guy, and during COVID they had a new baby, and his wife had a very significant job, and he had a very significant job, and it was apparent that one of the two of them was going to have to stay home they had 3 young kids. And so he chose to stay home, and he made good use of the time. He and I like to invest together, and he became a better investor than I am. He also took up a business where we've always been interested in sports memorabilia, and he buys it low and sells it high, and he's done real well with that. But now things have settled back down, and I was just in Dallas and talking to him, and he said, "Hey, I'm thinking about what I'm going to do next." Now, you'd think that somebody as glib as I am about careers and the like would just say, "Well, here's what you need to do." Well, we've been talking about it for a couple of weeks now. We haven't exactly come up with the right idea, so we're working on it. And then when he does it, now I can get into the advice part. When you do it, go in and do it. And if it's not as satisfying as you like, or not as rewarding as you like, or it's killing you, try something else. Don't be afraid to fail. I think that would be the thing that I have found the most in my retirement. I am unafraid to fail. I don't care, and I don't care what people say about me. If people were talking behind my back, "Oh, Don just screwed up something else again," who cares? I don't care. And I think if you go in with that attitude of, "I'm going to go in, I'm going to give it a good shot," but in insurance, when I went in, I put all of my everything in one bucket. I didn't have the opportunity to say, "I give up, I'm going to move on." I had to stick it out and make it work. But if you're going to be entrepreneurial, just by definition, you might have to make a few moves. And so I would be unafraid to make those moves. That would be my advice.
And that's fantastic advice. Is there anything else that we haven't talked about, no matter what it is, personal, professional, jokes, that you think is particularly important for our listeners to hear and that you want to share?
Yes. And I've written 2 books on it, retirement books. And that is to say that I worked for 40 years and never missed a paycheck. I loved it. I loved what I did. I loved the people I worked with. I was magnificent in the job that I did from time to time, and I was really crappy from time to time. But overall, it came out just dandy, and I was able to get out while still walking. And uh, and I didn't have a fear of retirement. I had a fear because of the cancer that was been over 20 years ago and didn't come back. Thank God. Hope it stays that way. Uh, I, I I had a fear that I was going to have worked my whole life as a student, as an athlete, as a corporate citizen, and then get to retirement and die 2 weeks later, as has happened to several of my friends.
Yeah.
But I've been the fortunate one. It's been a long time now, and I'm still wandering around. So I would say, uh, don't be fearful of retirement. Retirement is when you can find out what else you've got in you. And in those books, I point out, hey, did you play the violin when you were a kid? And then you got busy, right? And you haven't touched a violin in 40 years. Maybe you could be a good violin player. Why don't you give it another try? How about painting? How about music? How about, on and on and on. Go after these things. I always kind of wanted to be a photographer, but I didn't know what those little dials did or anything. And until I had the time to do it and someone who could teach me, it wasn't going to happen. And when it did finally happen, I went, I like this. And it's been quite rewarding. So I would just say, don't be fearful of retirement, and go into retirement with the idea of lose your fears. I I tell people all the time, and I don't say it this nicely, I don't give a poop. They say, well, you're going to go out and swim with sharks? They could eat you. I don't give a poop. I really don't. I've had a great long life. My kids know this. And if you're going to explore and do things, something bad can happen. We've had some bad things happen. And if you survive them, that's great. And if not, hopefully you make the daily news.
Yeah, well,
So
I
make a good last chapter in a book.
yeah, I love that mantra. Do not let fear dictate your life,
Right.
because that's no way to go out. Now,
And we all have it.
yes. Oh, it's human. It's human to
Yeah.
have fear, and it's good in certain situations. But yeah, I think it's very bad in a lot of situations throughout life.
Right.
Now, I've done you a
Right.
disservice because you've shared all of this wisdom and insight. And there's one story that you told me, and I'm not going to tell you what it was because it wasn't, you didn't tell it in the context of which I'm going to ask, but you have done, and I've been saying throughout this podcast, some of the most terrifying things that I've ever talked to anybody of doing, all in the pursuit of enjoyment, adventure, risk taking, but to get that incredible photo. What is the scariest thing you have done in your retirement?
I have a wonderful friend who I trust with my life, and I have trusted with my life, who owns Shark Diver magazine. He owns Shark Diver Excursions, I think it's called. He goes all over the world. He does some of the nuttiest things you've ever seen. Hey, let's get in the water with anacondas. What do you mean get in the water? Well, we'll swim along next to an anaconda and see how that goes. He called me one day. Hey, let's go up and Don, we'll put you in the water next to a polar bear swimming between icebergs, and you'll have a nice dry suit, and it'll be fine. So he calls me this one day and he says, saltwater crocodiles. He said, I figured out a way to get in the water with saltwater crocodiles and survive. And I said, well, tell me more about it. He told me quite a bit about it. And I said, so have you done it? And he said, well, no, I thought you and I go do it. I said, well, you thought wrong. I said, you go do it and show me the film, and then I'll go the second time. Well, he did it, and he survived. And I looked at it and
Good for him.
I said, that looks pretty scary, but I think I could do that. And so I got down there, Banco Chinchero, which is 50 miles, 45 miles out to sea off of the Belize-Mexico border. We went out in a ponga boat, which is scary in itself. We get out there, and there's 150 saltwater crocodiles. They're 10 to 15 feet long. They weigh up to 2,000 pounds. And there's nothing. There's no cage. There's nobody with a machine gun. There's nobody with a spear. It's you and the crocodile, and you're on a snorkel. And so he says to me, hey, Don, you're the oldest. I think there was 6 of us or something like that. He says, you're the oldest. You get in first. And I go, oh, what a prize that is. Wonderful. So he says, make sure you put on about 20 pounds of lead. And I said, 20 pounds of lead? Why would I do that? And he says, well, if you float, you die. If you're on the surface, they're going to take you out. And I said, well, yeah, I'll put 20 pounds of lead on. And as I did, I looked down and my hands were going like this. Nothing really scares me. I'm not too good with heights, but I don't really get scared of things. I get cautious, but I don't get scared. I looked down and my hands were shaking. I said, Eli, I think I'm afraid. And he says, I'm afraid too, buddy.
How long ago was this?
I got in with those crocodiles, but you know what? I have a wonderful friend of mine from London who acts as a safety guy for me from time to time, and we go on adventures together. And he's a great, big, strong guy and an actor and good-looking guy. And I kind of got behind him, pushed him, get us closer, pushed him forward, you know. And I had Eli watching out for me and the like. And so we did it with some sense to it, but it was terrifying. Every time I got in the water, some of the other people got used to it. I didn't. They were so big and vicious looking that it was terrifying. And a Mexican official, because you had to have a permit to get out there, came up to us one day and said, gentlemen, I'd like to remind you that we have no injuries out here. And I thought about that for a second. I go, yeah, it's because they tear your arm off and then roll you. And so, no, you're not injured. You're dead. Yep. So that's what he meant. So, yeah, that was the scariest thing I've done.
Why do you want to do those things at 76?
Well, it had to be done. Part of it is because my business partner and our old partner, Nick, were the first people to ever swim in the ocean right next to the lava and shoot photos down the curling wave with lava at the end of them. They're like 15 feet from the lava, and that lava's 2,000 degrees. And I filmed some of that and photographed some of that with them on the beach, but I refused to get in the water. First of all, when you first got in, it sucked you down because it's really deep right there, and it sucked them down and held them down for over a minute before they even came back up to try and take the shot. Mm-hmm. And I said, I'm going to watch my 2 friends get killed here. So they had that lot over me, and they didn't mention it to me more than 2 or 3 times a day for every day of my life. And so finally I said, you know, I know CJ's not really happy with snakes. I'll bet he's not too good with crocodiles. I'll go down and hop in with the crocodiles, and then I can even up with him a
You
little bit.
proved
Although I will
that
tell you,
point to him.
I would rather be in with the crocodiles than what he did with the lava. That to me was insane.
That's awesome, Don.
Got him on the Today Show.
Well, I think the crocodile should get you on the Today Show. And I don't remember if you shared.
I take it back. It got me on the Today Show, but it was the Australian Today Show.
Hey,
They had us on. Yeah.
that's something right there. And I
Yeah.
don't know if you've shared those shots with me, but if you haven't, would you mind sharing one or two of those photos, and I'll put them on the video stream of what you got?
Good. Be happy. You'll be horrified.
I know I will. Don, thank you so much for your time. I've had more fun than I can possibly have imagined I would have had. You've given a lot of excellent wisdom, advice. Your gallery is incredible. I encourage everybody to check it out. DonHurzeler.com, is that right?
Exactly right. Yep.
And that's DonHerzeler.com, DonHurzeler.com.
Hurzeler. Yep, exactly right. And I love to hear from your listeners, and have enjoyed the heck out of this. And so glad we got to meet up on a Maniboat.
Likewise, and I want to stay in contact. Thank you so much, Don.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Have a great
Bye-bye.
day. Well, that's all the time that we have for this week's episode of the Andrew Holland Podcast. I told you were going to be in for a treat with Don. He is an incredibly enthusiastic and vivacious individual at 76 years old. He's accomplished so many things. This is one of those episodes where I always tell you, you've got to watch the podcast on YouTube, our channel, the Andrew Holland Podcast. If you don't, you're missing out. You will miss out on some incredible photos if you're not watching the video version of this week's podcast. You can see a lot of he shared some gallery photos with me that you won't see on his website. But if you want to see some of the incredible photography that Don does, go to DonHurzeler.com. That's DonHurzeler.com. And you can look at his gallery. He has some incredible pieces there. And you can see some of the extreme risks that he takes just in looking at those pictures, just by the very nature of them. Really enjoyable conversation. Let me know what you think. As Don said, he wants to hear from you. I want to hear from you. Follow me on Twitter and Threads, Holland Podcast. Interact with me. Tell me what you liked about this episode. Share your thoughts with me, and I can share them with Don, or you can find Don and share directly with him. This was a really fun podcast, and I hope you felt the same way. And of course, our YouTube channel, the Andrew Holland Podcast. Subscribe, like this episode. Please share it with your family, friends, colleagues. That's how we grow. And of course, your favorite audio platforms. Please follow our podcast, like our podcast. Thank you so much for joining us this week. That's all the time that we have. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk again next Wednesday. Thank you for listening to the Andrew Holland Podcast. Be sure to visit our website, theandrewhollandpodcast.com, for additional content on business, entrepreneurship, and everything in between. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Andrew Holland Podcast, to get notifications when new podcasts have been released. And lastly, follow us on Twitter, Holland Podcast. That's Holland Podcast, for all the conversations we're having outside the podcast. Thanks again so much for joining us this week. Have a great day, and we'll talk again next week.